I knew my daughter-in-law wanted me out of my own home the morning I found my vintage cast-iron skillet resting at the bottom of the kitchen trash can. Jessica stood by the marble island sipping her iced matcha latte and scrolling through her phone as if she hadn't just discarded a piece of my family history. It was rusted Barbara. She muttered, not even bothering to look up when I walked in. We need modern things in this house. Clean things. I didn't yell, and I certainly didn't cry. I walked over, pulled the heavy pan from the clean garbage bag, and carried it to the sink. My son David sat at the dining table with his laptop open, rubbing his temples. He and Jessica had moved in 6 months ago to save for a down payment on their own place. I had offered them the guest wing. Slowly, Jessica's belongings had crept into every corner of the house, erasing my footprint. "Mom, just leave it." David sighed, his eyes glued to a budget spreadsheet. "We'll buy you a brand new one." "This one is perfectly fine," I replied, turning on the hot water to scrub the iron. I am 62 years old. I spent 30 years paying the mortgage on this 4-bedroom house. When my husband passed, I didn't crumble. I learned to fix the plumbing and mow the lawn. I wasn't about to be intimidated by a 30-year-old who preferred gray walls and sterile aesthetics. Later that afternoon, I noticed the heavy floral curtains in the living room were gone, replaced by flimsy, sheer white panels. Jessica walked in carrying an empty cardboard box. "The living room feels so much bigger now, right?" she beamed. "You really should start clearing out some of this clutter. It's getting to be too much for you to manage." She patted my arm, a gesture that felt much more like a push. She thought she was dealing with a fragile widow who would quietly fade into the background. She was entirely wrong. The real test of boundaries began with the daily household chores. When David and Jessica first arrived, I cooked a few dinners and washed some towels to help them settle into their new routine. Jessica took that inch and ran a mile with it. On Tuesday morning, I found a plastic laundry basket sitting right outside my bedroom door. It overflowed with Jessica's gym clothes and David's work shirts. A bright, pink, sticky note on top read, "Dark cycle, cold water, please." I stared at the note. I didn't feel angry. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. I picked up the heavy basket, walked down the hall to their bedroom, and set it squarely in the middle of their neatly made mattress. I didn't leave a note of my own. I simply went downstairs, made my tea, and sat on the back porch. An hour later, Jessica stomped down the wooden stairs. "Did you put our dirty laundry on our bed?" she asked, her voice tight and defensive. "I did," I answered, taking a slow sip of my Earl Grey. "I thought you were doing a load today." "I am doing my load today," I corrected gently. "The washing machine is free if you need to use it." She scoffed, crossing her arms. "David works 50 hours a week, and I have my remote job. We're exhausted, Barbara. I thought we were family." "We are." I smiled. "And in this family, adults wash their own clothes." She spun around and marched back upstairs. The next morning, I found their dirty dinner plates left on the dining table, crusted with dried pasta sauce. Instead of washing them, I took a plastic storage bin from the garage, placed the dirty dishes inside, and slid the bin just inside her home office door. If she wanted to play a game of attrition, she had chosen the wrong opponent. I had endless patience, but I wondered how long it would take before David noticed the tension building right under his nose. When they first moved in, I gave David a spare credit card linked to my secondary account. It was strictly meant for household groceries, a simple way to share the burden of food costs without tracking every single penny we spent. For months, the charges were perfectly normal: milk, chicken, vegetables, coffee. Then, the transaction alerts started changing. I sat at my desk, reviewing my monthly statement. There was a charge for $300 at a boutique home decor store and another for $500 at a luxury bedding shop. I didn't confront them immediately. I simply picked up the phone, called the bank, and reported the card as lost. I requested a new one with a different number, which I would keep firmly in my wallet. That evening, the doorbell rang. A delivery driver stood there with 3 massive boxes. Jessica rushed past me to open the door, her eyes gleaming with excitement. Oh, perfect. My new entryway table and the custom lamps, she announced, directing the man into the hallway. David walked out of his office looking bewildered. Jess, we talked about saving money. What is all this? It's for the house, babe. She dismissed him with a casual wave. This place desperately needs an update. Don't worry about it. I watched her sign the delivery receipt. She had clearly ordered them online using my card information saved on her phone. She felt so entitled to my space that she was decorating it using my money. That furniture looks heavy, I observed casually. It is, she smirked. It's solid oak. An investment for our future. I nodded, turning toward the kitchen. She had no idea the card was already dead. The real shock wouldn't be the furniture. It would be her scheduled hair appointment the following morning. I poured myself a glass of water, waiting for the inevitable storm to break. The storm arrived precisely at 11 a.m. the next day. I was in the backyard pruning my hydrangeas when the back door slammed open. Jessica marched onto the patio, her face flushed a deep, angry pink. Her hair was only half-styled, clipped up in messy sections. "Did you do something to the grocery card?" she demanded, planting her hands firmly on her hips. I snipped a dead branch. I canceled it. It seemed to have been compromised. There were strange charges for boutique furniture and luxury bedding. She gaped at me. Those were for the house. I was trying to make this place look less like a museum and more like an actual home. "This is my home," I replied calmly, setting my garden shears down on the table. "And I did not authorize those purchases. You will need to use your own funds from now on." "My card declined at the salon," she hissed, completely dropping the pretense of being a sweet daughter-in-law. It was humiliating. I had to call David away from a meeting to pay over the phone. "That sounds inconvenient," I offered without a single trace of sympathy. David appeared in the doorway behind her. He looked utterly exhausted. He glanced at Jessica, then at me. "Mom, why didn't you just tell us you were canceling it?" he asked quietly. "I shouldn't have to monitor a grocery card for furniture purchases, David," I answered, holding his gaze. "If you two are saving for a house, spending my money on lamps isn't the way to do it." David frowned, turning to his wife. "You used her card for the entryway table." Jessica defensively crossed her arms. "We live here too. We need a space that reflects us." David rubbed his face, shaking his head. He didn't argue with her, but the seed of realization had finally been planted. He was waking up to reality, and the clock was ticking. The tension in the house shifted from a quiet simmer to a rolling boil. Jessica stopped pretending to be polite. She stopped greeting me in the mornings and started inviting her friends over without asking, occupying the living room, as if she already owned the title to the property. On a Thursday afternoon, I returned from the grocery store to find her holding a tape measure in the hallway outside my bedroom. "What are you doing?" I asked, setting my heavy paper bags down on the floor. She reeled in the measuring tape, looking completely unfazed. "David and I were talking. My remote job is getting really demanding, and the guest room is just too small for an office and a bed. We think it makes more sense for us to take the master suite." I stared at her. "My bedroom." "Well, yes." She sighed as if explaining something simple to a toddler. "You're just one person. The basement room is perfectly fine and it has no stairs. It's safer for you anyway. We need the space more." She wasn't asking. She was informing me. I didn't argue. I picked up my groceries and walked into the kitchen. "I'll think about it," I murmured. Her eyes lit up with victory. She assumed my lack of shouting meant submission. The next morning, while Jessica was out getting coffee and David was at his office, I drove to the local hardware store. I purchased a heavy-duty deadbolt. Within an hour, I had replaced the standard lock on the master bedroom door. I tested the new brass key, slipping it into my pocket. When I left the house to run errands later that day, I made sure the door was firmly locked. Let her try to move her desk into a room she couldn't even open. The boundaries were no longer just verbal. They were solid metal. When I returned home, Jessica was fuming on the sofa. She glared at me as I walked past, but didn't say a word about the newly locked door. She knew she had overstepped, but she was already regrouping for her next move. That weekend, she decided to change tactics. She invited her parents and a few of her friends over for a dinner party. I wasn't officially invited, but I was expected to stay out of the way. I spent the evening in my secured bedroom reading a novel, occasionally hearing the clinking of glasses and loud laughter echoing from downstairs. Around 8 o'clock, I went down to the kitchen to get a glass of water. The dining room was completely full. Jessica was holding court at the head of the table, pouring wine for her mother. "It's a lot of work, but we're finally making this place our own," Jessica announced loudly, making sure her voice carried directly into the kitchen. "David and I are planning to knock down that wall next month to open up the kitchen. It's just too cramped." Her mother nodded approvingly. "It's about time. It's so generous of you to take on the burden of this big property." I stood in the shadows of the hallway listening. She wasn't just talking about redecorating anymore. She was talking about structural demolition. She was claiming territory in front of witnesses to make it feel real. I looked at David. He sat at the opposite end of the table, staring at his plate. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't joining in the toasts. He looked like a man slowly suffocating under the weight of his wife's entitlement. I walked quietly back upstairs. I didn't need to make a scene in front of her guests. I knew the breaking point was coming, and I wanted to be perfectly calm when it finally arrived. The climax arrived on a mundane Tuesday evening. The dinner party guests were long gone, leaving behind a lingering tension in the air. I was sitting at the kitchen island, quietly reviewing my property tax documents. Jessica stormed in a stack of mail, gripped tightly in her hand. She slammed it onto the marble counter. "I am so tired of this," she snapped. David, who had been reading on the sofa in the living room, sat up. "Tired of what, Jess?" She pointed a manicured finger directly at me. "Tired of feeling like a guest. I can't move a chair without her moving it back. I can't even get into the master bedroom because she changed the locks like some paranoid hoarder." I slowly folded my documents and placed them inside my manila folder. "You have no business being in my bedroom, Jessica," she scoffed, crossing her arms. She looked at David, expecting him to back her up, but he remained silent, his jaw clenched tight. Emboldened by her own frustration, she turned her full attention back to me. Her eyes were hard and cold. "Look, Barbara, this arrangement isn't working," she declared, her voice echoing off the kitchen walls. "David and I need our own space to build our life. We need privacy. You're holding us back." I remained completely still. "Are you suggesting you and David move out?" She let out a harsh, patronizing laugh. "No. I'm suggesting you do." She leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the counter, delivering the line she must have rehearsed in her head 100 times. "Don't live with us anymore. Go rent a room somewhere else. You don't need a house this big." The kitchen fell dead silent. I didn't look at her. I slowly turned my head and looked directly at my son. The ball was in his court now. For a long moment, the only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. Jessica stood tall, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips, absolutely certain she had finally won. She thought David was too passive to intervene. She thought he would just lower his head and let her bulldoze his mother out of her own home. David stood up from the sofa. He walked slowly into the kitchen, his face completely unreadable. "David, tell her," Jessica urged, her tone softening into something almost sweet. "Tell her it's for the best." David stopped beside the kitchen island. He looked at the discarded mail, then at me, and finally turned to his wife. His expression wasn't angry. It was intensely, profoundly exhausted. "Jess," he began, his voice dangerously low. "My mother isn't going anywhere." Jessica's smirk faltered slightly. "What, babe? We talked about this?" "No, you talked about this," he corrected sharply. "You talked about tearing down walls. You talked about taking her bedroom. You used her credit card to buy furniture she didn't want. I did that for us." She shot back, her voice rising in pitch. David shook his head, standing squarely between us. He looked her directly in the eyes. "Then you should start packing, because this house belongs to my mother." Her smile vanished instantly. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very small. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "I invited you here to save money." David continued, his tone firm and unyielding. "Instead, you've spent the last 6 months trying to erase the woman who put a roof over our heads. I'm done watching it." Jessica took a step back, her eyes darting between the two of us. She finally realized her foundation had just collapsed, and there was nothing left to hold on to. Jessica waited for the punchline. She waited for David to run a hand through his hair, sigh heavily, and apologize for losing his temper. But David didn't move. He stood firmly in the kitchen, a solid barrier between his wife's ambition and my peace. "You're choosing her over me?" Jessica finally choked out, tears of genuine panic welling in her eyes. "I'm choosing reality," David answered flatly. "I rented a 2-bedroom apartment across town this morning. I pick up the keys tomorrow." My eyebrows raised slightly. I hadn't known that. My son had been quietly making his own preparations while Jessica was busy staging dinner parties and planning kitchen demolitions. "An apartment," Jessica gasped, horrified. "I am not moving into some tiny rental. We are supposed to be building equity. We'll build it with our own money," David replied, walking past her to grab a roll of heavy trash bags from the pantry. He tossed them onto the counter. "Start packing. We're leaving by the weekend." Over the next 3 days, the house was filled with the sound of packing tape ripping and doors slamming. Jessica tried everything. She cried loudly in the hallway. She tried to give me the silent treatment. She even tried to hug me and apologize, claiming the stress of her job had made her act crazy. I accepted her apology politely, but I didn't offer her a tissue, and I certainly didn't offer her the house. I spent my time in the garden planting new bulbs for the spring. I didn't help them pack, and I didn't hover. I simply reclaimed my space. As the last box was carried out the front door, Jessica refused to look at me. She got into her car and slammed the door. David lingered on the porch, holding his duffel bag. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." Mom, David said, his hand resting on the wooden porch railing. He looked older, but the heavy exhaustion that had plagued him for months was finally gone. "You saw it when it mattered, David," I replied, handing him a container of leftover roast chicken. "That's what counts." He smiled, a genuine, relaxed expression I hadn't seen since he moved back in. He hugged me tightly, took the food, and walked to his car. I watched his taillights disappear down the street before stepping back inside. I closed the heavy front door and turned the deadbolt. The click echoed through the empty hallway. The silence wasn't lonely. It was expansive. It was the sound of a house breathing a massive sigh of relief. The next morning, I took down the sheer white curtains in the living room and hung my heavy floral ones back up. I moved the dishes around in the cabinets exactly how I liked them. It has been a year since they left. David visits every Sunday for lunch. He looks healthier. He tells me that he and Jessica are doing better now that they are living within their own means and forced to focus on their actual marriage instead of my real estate. They have boundaries now, and so do I. I didn't need to fight screaming matches or hire a legal team to save my home. I only needed to stand my ground, control my resources, and let the truth do the heavy lifting. I am Barbara. This is my house, my sanctuary, and my rules. And as I sit on the porch with my vintage cast iron skillet sizzling on the stove inside, I know I wouldn't have it any other way. If there's one thing I took away from all of this, it's that protecting your peace doesn't require a screaming match or a dramatic showdown. Sometimes the strongest boundary you can set is just a quiet, firm no and a locked door. As parents, we often feel this intense pressure to accommodate our children, to give them everything, even at the expense of our own comfort. But I realized that true love doesn't mean sacrificing your own sanctuary. You teach people how to treat you by what you choose to tolerate. By simply refusing to participate in my own disrespect, I didn't just save my home. I helped my son find his backbone too. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation where you had to set a tough boundary with a family member? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to read your experiences. If you found my story relatable, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about navigating family dynamics and reclaiming your peace. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.